thanks a lot for doing this.
Thank you.
And so I just want to kind of jump right in here. So got your book here, Wounded Angels. Sure, we're definitely going to talk about that. And you have kind of said to me before that you feel that your healing path begins with addiction. So do you want to talk about that?
Um, yeah, healing path begins with addiction. Could you clarify what you mean?
Well, just in terms of, sorry, the journey that you've been on, we have talked about trauma and it's
Mm-hmm.
in the book and kind of inner child healing and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like part of that overlaps with what I do in that
Mm-hmm.
it sort of involves addiction. So
Oh,
I,
absolutely.
mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. To clarify that, I would say the recovery journey, the healing journey, began with addiction recovery. Yes, I would
Right.
say the journey began with trauma.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess all right, well, let's just talk about both. I mean, let's talk about what was the
Sure.
trauma, what was the addiction. I'm sure anyone listening kind of wants to understand both of those things.
Absolutely. Okay. So the trauma, childhood trauma, the biggest one was my mother dying when I was very young, 4 years old. And then the later learning that she had killed herself, which I learned when I was 9. So, and then there was a lot of other dysfunction, alcoholic dad, um, instability, and other traumatic stuff that happened in childhood. So that's when I started to become broken. Um, and then, as far as addiction is concerned, I have two really big ones that I have been coping with over the last 7, 8 years. One is the alcoholism. The other is codependency. And I had to address the substance addiction first, but things didn't really get better for me, which is a lot of people's story. And then I started having to come to terms with the codependency addiction, which was every bit as powerful. The people addiction was every bit as powerful as the substance addiction. So, and we can go into the details on that kind of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I want to say that those are great answers to that question. I also want to say I'm so sorry that that happened to you. I mean, that's terrible. I'm not happy to hear that, but I
No.
kind of, in a weird way, I'm like, these are just such great topics. I think people really struggle with these topics. I'm happy to have someone on to talk about them. So,
Absolutely.
you know,
Thank you. Yeah.
yeah. So okay. So as far as, alcohol goes, I mean,
Hmm.
what would you say made you feel like, oh, maybe I have a problem with alcohol? What was like a sign about that?
Um, yeah, great question. I was in delusion for a very, very long time. And yeah, let's go backwards a little bit. So, uh, in terms of the substance abuse, and drugs is part of my story too, but alcohol was the main thing over the decades. 55 years old now. I was in recovery in my 20s. I was tossed into recovery because I dropped out of college and tried to kill myself, and they put me in the rehab. But I didn't really think I had a problem. And one of the big things for me was, I think now, as I said, my dad was alcoholic. He passed away last year, actually, and I didn't want to call myself an alcoholic because I didn't want to be like him. So like even when I was in my 20s, I was like, oh yeah, no, I have a drug addiction. That sounds cooler. I'll be an addict. But like I would never say the word alcoholic, even though alcohol dominated my life through my 20s and 30s and almost through all my 40s as well. So 3 painful decades. And along that time frame, I lost pretty much everything. I had at one point, I'm in Japan. I'm in Tokyo, Japan right now, which is basically home. It's been home for a long time. I had a dream job playing drums at Tokyo Disneyland, um, which was drumming is one of my big things. Lost that job due to the alcoholism. Lost any friends or family that I might have, had any decent relationship with. Either I distanced myself so they couldn't see what was going on, or I just, couldn't maintain relationships. That went on even after I quit the drinking, but that's the codependency side of it. But I'd kind of even given up on relationships. I was just basically a hermit for like the last 11 years of my drinking. And so all that time, and I probably started drinking heavily around 1920. I started a little late because the drumming sort of, helped me to cope with life for a while, for a little while, and I was able to sort of stay away from the addiction side. But then by the middle of college, it started to get out of control. As I said, I dropped out of college and tried to kill myself and ended up in a rehab when I was like 22 or 23, but I didn't have a problem. And then I came to Japan, which kind of intensified everything because in Japan, alcohol is available 24/7, anywhere you want. Everybody drinks, everybody gets drunk. There are very few consequences. I didn't have a car, so I didn't have any risk of like driving drunk or doing any of the kind of things that can really, stop someone cold. So I just continued with that. Um, but in my 20s, I did have a recovery experience, even though it didn't stick. So when I did finally think, yeah, my real problem is alcohol, when it finally hit me decades later at age 47, 46, 47, I knew that the recovery was available, because I'd done it like years, decades before. So I knew where to go to start to look for help. And then that began, my last drink was September 11th, 2018. And since then I haven't had an intentional drink. I did accidentally sip alcohol a couple times because like, it's on the table or whatnot. Like what was supposed to be a zero alcohol beer wasn't, so that's, just to qualify that. But yeah, since September 11th, 2018, that's when I started with the recovery process.
Nice. Well, awesome. Congratulations on your clean time from alcohol.
Thanks.
Um, So I feel like, yeah, probably anyone listening understands what alcoholism is, kind of knows what that sort of looks like, and maybe they've
Mm,
been to an AA meeting before. I feel like maybe not everybody understands codependency
no,
addiction. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
absolutely. And it's really hard to define. It's one of those things like, like if you have it, or if start to identify it. For me, it became really clear. And the way I explain it, and if people listening have a substance issue, you know how it feels if you can't get enough of what you want to use, right? So um, even a low bottom alcoholic can moderate their drinking for a short amount of time if they have to. For example, you're at the dinner with your boss and you really want to drink beer every 10 minutes, but you can't because it's not socially acceptable. So an alcoholic can sit there and, hang on and not drink as much as they want, but it's incredibly uncomfortable, right? It's like this, like, yeah, it's this sense of like, I need this and I'm not getting what I need. Um, when I realized codependency was the exact same thing, was when I had a really hero worship kind of fixation on a person who, if they approved of me, I was happy. If they weren't happy with me, then I thought I was a worthless piece of shit. What I realized at that time was like, this feels exactly like I can't get enough to drink. Like I can't get enough of this person's attention. And I don't feel like if I was getting complete attention from this person, I would feel good. I would feel comfortable, at ease, as if I'd had enough alcohol or drugs. So for me, it became very clear. Like they talk about in 12 step, they talk about the spiritual malady. It's like it says, and I often talk about the four types of health: physical health, emotional health, mental health, and spiritual health. I see those as four different things to check on. Sometimes I can be in terrible physical health, but really good spiritual health, and then emotional and mental as well. Um, you know, for me, it was like I just totally lost my train of thought. I'm sorry about the. Can you remind me what I was saying just before that?
No, yeah, that's okay. No, you're doing great. I really like what you're talking about. I mean, you're talking about sort of your self-esteem and your happiness being directly attached to this person that you're sort of worshiping like a hero, and you're sort of
Mm-hmm.
addicted to the approval of, kind of being loved by a person, and obviously how
Right.
that spiritually is not a sustainable system. I'm sure that's not
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. And then yeah. So spiritual malady was where I got off track. That's the thing is I realized when they talk about that for substances, the spiritual malady, it's a spiritual disease and you need a spiritual solution, that kind of thing, was the same for codependency. That's what I was trying to loop back to.
right. No, that's great. I mean, to me, it's super interesting. Again, I'm sorry that you went through that, but
Oh,
delighted to
thanks.
have you here talking about it. So, recovery from that, I mean, if anybody out there is listening and they're like, oh, I'm kind of like that. Maybe I have a codependency thing. What do
Mm-hmm.
you suggest? How does one recover from that?
Well, it's the same thing. Well, I'm not an expert, first of all. I can only speak for myself. So please get help. This is, the thing that I was avoiding for years and decades. Talk to people. There's resources out there and that sort of thing. But if you're reluctant to, jump in, one thing anybody can do is read the stuff, right? If you don't know anything about 12 step, they have literature. If you don't know anything about codependency, there's the Codependence Anonymous has a book. There's plenty of information about what this stuff is. And there's often online you can find these like questionnaires, right? The funny thing is, again, with the denial, I used to think I wasn't too low bottom with the alcohol. I wasn't that bad. I was never that bad. Even though I ended up hospitalized, I have broken bones from accidents while intoxicated, lost jobs, etc. Had trouble with police, but I wasn't that low bottom, right? That in my mind. And then I took that, there was a 20 question quiz, right? How alcoholic are you? I got 20 out of 20. And it said, like, I think it said if you have three or more, then you're probably an alcoholic. If you have four or more, you're a low bottom alcoholic. And I did 20 out of 20. And most of the people I know get 20 out of 20 or 18 or 19 or 20 questions. So, I mean, you know, we're all smart, we're all logical. Like, even if you're in deep denial, you can go and you can read these questionnaires and you can be like, well, according to Johns Hopkins University, I might have a problem. Okay, let's like just for fun, let's consider the idea that I might have a problem. Let me read more about it. Let me research what other people are saying about it. Let me read about what people who've gone through this are saying. And you can, at least do that.
Right. So, hmm, great. So, first of all, Codependence Anonymous. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like a lot of people don't even know that's a thing. People
Yeah,
have probably heard of Alcoholics Anonymous.
sure.
I feel
And
like
I'm
people,
not, I am very respectful of the anonymity thing. So I don't like, I'm not here to advocate for 12 step necessarily. I know there's a lot of ways to heal and recover. But as far as reading literature and whatnot, the Alcoholics Anonymous has a book. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous. They call it the big book. It's known as. But then Codependence Anonymous also has a book. So, you can get your hands on it and read it. And they're similar programs. They're both 12 step, but they're not the same. And there's a lot of 12 step programs out there. You get OA, Overeaters Anonymous, and NA is Narcotics Anonymous. I think there's Gamblers. And they're all based on, AA was the original founding 12 step um, program, and then these others have sort of sprung from it.
yep. Yeah, you got it. There's a ton of them. There's like sex stuff, gambling stuff,
That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
anything you can, get
Anything.
addicted
Yeah,
to.
pretty much.
There's Debtors
Oh,
Anonymous.
yeah. Yeah, and the other thing I was going to say about that is there's also other books on codependency. It's not just Codependence Anonymous. There's a really famous author, Melanie Beattie, I think is her name, and really popular and writes a lot of codependency books, which are, I mean, it can't hurt to learn more. Is basically what I'm advising. Is
Right.
like when you're wondering if you have a problem, it's like, okay, well, you don't have to say I have a problem or not today, but you can look into it. That's the thing, is like, to kind of break through that barrier of being afraid to even learn more, which is very, it's scary if you start to think that you have a problem, and so this addiction, and it's like, I don't really want to look at this. I don't really want to think about it. And it makes sense because it's scary. But like you can ease into it by just like, dedicating to learning a bit more, at least to start.
Yeah, sure, totally. So if you want to say some books that were helpful for you, I can just put them as like links
Sure.
in the
Yeah.
notes of the episode. So
Yeah. We'll do that.
or even if you forgot to mention them and just wanted to email them to me, I would just put them in there.
Okay.
So, I'm kind of curious now. You recognize that you have these problems. You go on this journey of healing, you write a book about it. So,
Hmm.
what kind of works and doesn't work for you as someone embarking on this journey? I want to know, I want people to hear I mean, what happens? How do you get better?
Okay. What doesn't work for me is relying on the advice of others. That made me worse instead of better. And so, by that I mean, like, kind of deifying people, like hero worshiping. It's like, oh, there was a very low self-esteem element to me. And again, this goes back to the trauma. And I had my first shame attack at age 9. That was when I learned that my mother had killed herself. And I didn't know what it was at the time. I just knew it was the most horrible feeling. And most people, or a lot of people, don't know a lot about shame. And they might be more familiar with a panic attack, because everybody knows what it feels like if a tiger walked into the room, right? We're gonna panic, we're gonna run, fight or flight, panic attack. So a lot of people have experienced it, or they can at least imagine it. The shame attack is just as horrible, just as disquieting, and just like you want nothing more than to make it go away however you can. And I experienced that at age 9. So it's like, I when I started doing the healing work and I started doing the inner child work, I was actually really able to look back and say, oh, this is what was going on when I was 9. Because no 9-year old deserves to feel shame. No 9-year old does anything that warrants shame or dread and these kinds of feelings that I was having. So logically speaking, I could see, oh, this was a traumatized kid. But the feeling at the time was, I'm absolutely discardable, worthless, unlikable, unlovable. And that's how I felt. And that was intensified by the fact that I couldn't establish or keep relationships with peers, with friends. I couldn't make friends. I was the weird one. I was I got defiant and angry because kids wouldn't be nice to me. I got bullied. I, I was friendless. And so, yeah, you are likable and you're unlikable and unlovable. It's obvious. Here's the evidence. None of the kids like you. There's something wrong with you. I don't know what's wrong with me, but something's wrong with me. And that's kind of how I went through the whole childhood. And then, you know, going into the substance addiction, I reinforced it even more because I would get drunk and then be an asshole, and then everybody'd be mad at me, and like. But occasionally, the thing about the alcohol and drugs is, and a lot of people speak this same story. For a time, it actually improved things. Like I would be more sociable. I was able to be charismatic. I could go to a bar and have a good night, and people would be liking me. And so I was like, well, if I have a few drinks, then I can make friends and have friends. So that's kind of how it starts for a lot of people. It works until it doesn't work. It starts becoming problematic. But at first, when I was younger, in my early mid 20s, I had some good times, and I felt like, well, if I can just have some drinks, then everything will be okay. Um, but still, I hated myself. I was unlikable. I was unlovable, and that went all the way through 20s, 30s, 40s, and then even into after I quit drinking. I hadn't addressed that. And that's when I switched from alcohol to people. And it's like, oh, if you, this person who's advising me on how to quit, or this person that I've become friends with, if you like me and are saying, oh, you're a great guy, David, I think you're cool, then I like myself. But that couldn't last. It didn't last because as soon as I would have a conflict with that person, then suddenly I would go back to hating myself again. And so the inner child work, healing the trauma, and doing the codependence work, starting to like and love myself, which takes years. Sorry to say, but if anybody's struggling with that, it takes a long time and it's not easy. But I had to do it in order to become genuinely likable and genuinely lovable to others, because that's where I'm at today. And I can even tell you, I was talking to a friend last night about that. Last night, I went out with a bunch of friends. We had dinner, um, and several of them suggested coming out where I live an hour out of Tokyo, so I'm way out of town. They're like, "Oh, we're gonna drive out to your place tomorrow. We'll go see Star Wars. We'll go see Mandalorian and Grogu." We put together a hang, and I realized last night I was like, I'm liked and loved by my friends, like genuinely and easily, and it's beautiful. But it had to start with me liking and loving myself, and it took a long time.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you have that. I mean, I have that sometimes too. Just hanging out with my friends and realizing how important that is and how
Mm-hmm.
it's a big part of my recovery. It's a big part of my journey just as a person trying to be happy in the world.
Yep.
So you mentioned inner child
Yeah.
stuff, inner child work. Now this is like all over the book. Um,
Yeah.
you want to kind of explain to people out there what you mean by that, what that means to you.
Mm-hmm. So for me, inner child, and for me, it's more like inner children. Although I was advised by a publishing guy, it's like everybody knows what inner child means, but if you say inner children, nobody knows what you're talking about. But for me, it's all different facets of my life. Often when I was a kid, but not always. And it has to do with a part of me that got kind of stuck in a situation, in an experience that was too much to handle at the time. I didn't have any tools to handle it, and that part of me just got stuck in a trauma. And the best example is the one I've already talked about, the 9 year old. My father had told me the night before that your mother had killed herself. That's how she died. I was sitting in school the next day, feeling floods of dread and shame and fear and confusion without the aftercare that I really needed. And thinking things like, why, what's wrong with me that she would do that, or what are the other kids going to think about me? What am I going to do now? They already dislike me because I was already a weirdo for, I had behavioral problems and I was just broken, and it just made things so much worse. And I had that shame attack. And this is actually the crux of the book. Um, 40 years later, right when I hit my rock bottom with codependency, I had a re-traumatization under different circumstances. Somebody that I loved and admired discarded me unfairly, kind of kicked me to the curb. Like, I'm not going to associate with you anymore. Somebody I loved and admired. Um, and I had a complete re traumatization. I felt those same exact feelings at age 50 of shame and dread, sorrow, confusion, um, it just like brought me back to when I was 9. It was like the same thing. It was like a trigger. When I was 50, this horrible thing happened, and it was a horrible thing. But it reminded me. It took me all the way back to the inner child that had experienced something just as bad or even worse. And all of a sudden, I could connect it. All of a sudden, I saw that 9 year old perfectly, and what he'd gone through, and how horrible it was. And even at age 50, it was practically impossible for me to deal with. Even though I had like recovery tools, I knew about like how to do 12-step inventories. I had all those tools, and it was still next to impossible. And so I could immediately empathize and like and love that 9 year old who had been through so much and had none of those tools. I don't even know how he survived. I don't know how I survived back then. It was really bad. It was really traumatic. That's absolute profound trauma. And so I was able to start to sort of connect with that part of me, remember how it felt when I was 9, and then sort of just feeling more love and empathy for what I'd gone through rather than just kind of hating myself and, oh yeah, I was really pathetic when I was young. I was went through all this shit. Kids didn't like me. It sucked. I was really difficult to deal with. I was also scapegoated in the home too. So there was a lot of that too. So that was the biggest inner child facet that I've had. But there are others. There are a lot of others, and so I started writing about it. That was in Wounded Angels. Basically, every chapter is a different experience like that. Get like an in the moment trigger, um, and then start looking into the inner child connection between the trigger now and what happened a long time ago. And there's a technique for doing this too, which is in the book, and I can also explain it if you like.
Yeah, sure. I don't want you to give too much away from the book. Obviously, we want people to
Mm-hmm.
check the book out. We don't want to say all the
Yeah.
secrets in the book, but
Oh no, there's no secrets in the book. Yeah, no worries about that. It's not a secret, and it's not my technique either. It's and I need to actually write it down when I do podcasts because I tend to forget the name of the person whose technique it is, but it's in the book. I give credit, and it's a simple technique actually. So the way it goes is essentially you get triggered. I assume everybody kind of knows what being triggered means, right? Although it's become sort of like, woke thing or whatever. Oh, he's triggered, whatever. But for me, being triggered is pretty simply I'm having an oversized reaction to something, right? Like somebody, so I give the example of like my friends go and have dinner and they don't invite me. And then, uh, of course, a normal reaction would be, oh, that sucks, or I'm disappointed. But an oversized reaction is like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. Everybody hates me. What can I possibly do? I can't do anything right. They're such assholes. I can't stand it. And you use this like, this blow up reaction. It's okay. I'm triggered. This is bigger than the situation I'm in. So to me, that goes back to inner child. And then the technique is you start to vocalize everything that's you're experiencing, the thoughts, the emotions, the physiology in the third person. So what I would do is say, he's pissed off and outraged, and he can't believe they went to dinner without him. He's always feels like he's always left out. He nobody ever listens to him. Nobody ever realizes how lonely he is. He feels angry. He feels afraid. He feels shame. His heart's racing. He's, all this, like just describe what's going on in the third person. And the more you can make the emotions and the feelings as powerful and upfront as you can, the better. And then you switch to second person and you say something like, who are you? Right. And for me, it doesn't always work, but like some of the time, if I say, who are you? And then I sort of go quiet and I just, just become present, and an image will come to mind or a memory of something that happened. I actually had some pretty profound inner child stuff go on the last couple of weeks. And by the way, the follow up to Wounded Angels is coming soon. I'm continuing to write this experience. Um, and what came up the last couple of weeks was around two runaways. I ran away from home at least twice. I don't remember how many times, but at least twice. And the runaway inner child was very financially fearful. I didn't have much money when I ran away, and lost. I got lost both times. Um, I was in danger because a little kid running away and walking around the streets of Boston late at night is not ideal. I think the first time I was 10 or 11, and the second time I was like 13 or 14. Um, and so that had been buried for a long time, and the reason it cropped up was because I was having a lot of financial insecurities recently. A lot of like, because I'm going to the Philippines next week, and suddenly it's like, oh, I better save my money. What, and I'm really nervous. And it's like, no, I mean, everything's fine. I've got everything planned out, and I'm 55 years old, and I have a job. So why am I freaking out like I've got no money? Oh, and I started to do the inner child work, and that's when the runaway came up. So I hope I explained the technique well.
Yeah,
It's really
no,
simple, actually. Yeah,
I love that.
yeah,
You explained it very well, and we can put a link to that, if anybody wants
sure.
to read about that. So,
Yeah.
how about, today, kind of just in an average day? I mean, you mentioned you're 55 years old, you're living in Japan. In your
Yep.
daily routine or your practices, what's useful for you? What are your daily things that you do? You do
Hmm.
creative stuff, maybe you do kind of hobbies or just things that help you to kind
Right.
of keep it all together. Why don't you tell me about that?
Sure. Um, well, first of all, I don't do this stuff every day, so it's not like I'm going around doing inner child work and whatnot. It's like it ebbs and flows, and it's not something that you know is foremost in my life. My life is pretty simple. I like routine, actually. I found, and to clarify, I'm not living in Japan. I'm actually a digital nomad at this point. I've been traveling for about 18 months. I'm back in Japan, heading for the Philippines next week. Last year, I was in Vietnam, I was in Thailand, and I was in Indonesia, doing some drumming clinics. I do some kind of coaching clinics for drumming and writing. I also write fiction. So speaking of hobbies or other, career stuff, I write nonfiction and fiction. The fiction I write is sci-fi. So to me, it's really two sides of the same coin. It's I tried to figure out how to put my website together, um, to show that like I write the nonfiction, which is looking at the past and healing and understanding what's going on in the present, and then I write sci-fi, which is kind of like my hopeful vision of the future. It's like, okay, once we start healing and feel better, how are we gonna come up with a hopeful better future? Because right now the future, I mean, everything's kind of bleak these days if you watch the news. So that I'm doing a lot of writing, doing some drumming stuff. And then routine wise, I feel very grounded in Japan. I was glad to get back. I ride a bicycle. That's my exercise. I like riding a bike. I live near the beach, Tokyo Bay. So I go down to the beach, a little bit of chilling, a little bit of, prayer and meditation kind of stuff. I like to be grounded in that kind of routine. And that's sort of part of the, recovery suggestions, to have, good exercise, good, as I said, physical health, mental health, spiritual health, and emotional health. Physically, I do the cycling, and then I go to the beach and do like kind of meditative stuff, which is good for my spiritual and emotional health. Mental health wise, I don't know what I do for mental health except, I guess, talk to people and that sort of thing. I don't have a psychiatrist or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that, I feel like we have a lot in common, music stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, I like to write. So much of what you're saying, I like to travel and I love being near the beach. I mean, to me, all that stuff to kind of keeps me happy, and being happy is part of, me being in recovery and doing good.
Mm-hmm.
If I feel sad or depressed, that's not a good setup for me. So it's like, you know,
Yeah.
it's important to like where you live and like what you do and have things that keep you busy and keep you happy. So in terms of like what you would recommend to someone, if anybody out there is listening and they're like, oh yeah, I have some of these issues and I want to get this book and I wish I could ask this guy, what does he recommend to me? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say to someone like that?
Well, I mean, if anybody wanted to ask me, they can reach out. That's easy enough because you can just email me off of my website. Um, and I'm an open person when it comes to that. And to extrapolate on that, um, you can reach out to the recovery community because there's a lot of people out there that are looking to be helpful. And it's not as hard as you might think. Like people come in coming off drugs and alcohol, and they think, I don't want to bother anybody. I don't want to, text you or call you. I don't want to bother you. But for me, that's no bother. In fact, I really appreciate hearing from people, and I like to share what I know, or even just make new connections. I really don't mind it, from people who are like-minded, like people who've gone through similar shit that we've gone through. And that's just me, but I've heard a lot of other people say the same thing. And so, there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of receptive and welcoming people out there. Not everybody. So you might, talk to somebody, and they're not that nice, or you feel like you've annoyed them. Well, talk to somebody else. But, if you're struggling, you don't have to be alone. As I said, there's literature out there, and there's people out there that are out to help you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. That's a great answer. I agree. I mean, I tell people all the time, you can use every little resource you can find. If a YouTube video might be helpful, or if a book might be helpful, a podcast, maybe a therapist or a support group, like why not just give yourself the best possible, percentage or probability to feel better.
Yeah.
Um, and I like something that you said earlier, like what doesn't work for you is just every everybody tells you what to do, right? Everybody said, "Oh, you're sick. Here's my recipe for chicken soup," or "Oh, you got to go see my doctor," right? People love to tell everyone what to do. If anything's wrong,
Yeah.
everybody somehow knows the answer, and you got to do their thing. And there's something a little toxic about that, right? Like it's a little narcissistic. I know the answer. You have to do what I'm telling you to do.
Yeah. It's For me, I had to find my own integrity. That was part of the self-like and self-love. Like, what does my morality say? What's my integrity? And then for me, it's been a very spiritual thing. So I'm not here to talk religion or whatever, but for me, prayer and meditation is a big part of it. And reflecting on, what are my morals, what is my integrity. And so, I was being told what to do by people that I kind of looked up to, because, well, they were sober for 10 years, or this other person seems to really have a great life. This guy's a millionaire. I should listen to him, because, like, I'm really struggling with money, and he's a millionaire. So if I do what he does, maybe I'll be okay. um, I think in early recovery, and only, when you're just getting off drugs and alcohol, it does make sense to allow yourself to be guided by others, or a doctor, a psychiatrist. Put yourself in under the care of a doctor. Um, if you're joining groups or support groups and that sort of thing, yeah, taking advice is not a bad thing. But then if you get to a point where somebody else is running your life for you, and your well-being depends on their approval, this was what happened with me. And that's what, for like the first 3 years of, not having any substances in my body, I was replacing that with the approval of others in a really intense way. And that was my codependency getting worse and getting worse and worse. And I had to address it, because I was almost or just as miserable as I was when I was drinking. It was just a different kind of misery. So, yeah, for me, like that. We're all adults.
Is there anything you wanted to add kind of at the end here? Anything you wanted to say that you didn't get to say?
Um, no, not really. I do encourage people to check out my book if you're looking for, ideas on how to sort of explore this stuff. But I also, I've been sort of giving a warning of sorts. This is sort of, not the kind of thing that you want to jump into if you're in early recovery. It's not the kind of thing that um, it's very heavy stuff. What I'm talking about in the book, the inner child stuff, is very heavy. Some people might want to be under a doctor's care to be doing that sort of thing. There's IFS and inner child work that can be done, in conjunction. So if you're early on, I'd say just focus on the, staying clean, staying sober, and that sort of thing, and don't worry too much. But if you're a little bit further down the road and you want to see, how the healing work looks, then you can read my book because I really spell out a lot of what we talked about today in the book, exactly like what I did and the results that I got, which were often surprising, but they were always revealing, like more about um, what it feels like to heal. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and you can see more about the book and whatnot at my website, which is easy, daviddeanhaskell.com. So
Great. So yeah, we'll definitely put a link to the website, put a link to the book, a lot of the things that we talked about. You're saying anyone can email you if you have a question. You're kind of
sure,
being, public here.
totally,
Not everybody does that, so that, thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, anyone listening, I have the book. I've talked to this guy before. I mean, this is a guy who is always really careful with his language. He'll be like, "Oh, I'm not really an expert in this topic. I'm not a doctor. I don't want anyone to think." I mean, a lot of that going on. I think that's great. I really appreciate that. I like how sort of humble that is. It is true that trauma work is very serious. If you kind of don't know what you're doing, it's almost like going to the gym, and if you do the wrong machine, you could injure yourself. So I appreciate you saying that. At the same time, I think your heart is in a really great place, and you have a lot of good things to say to people out there that have similar, issues or whatever. So. I know the book kind of has that disclaimer. It's like I'm not telling anyone what to do. I'm not, there's a lot that's at the beginning of the book, that's at the end of the book. I saw that. So that's coming through loud and clear. But I do really appreciate you taking the time to just kind of share what you know and kind of what worked for you. And I think that's the best way to do it. Just say, well, here, here's what worked for me. This is a suggestion. You don't have to do it. And, I love that. And I really appreciate having the time to talk with you. And, I'll talk to you soon. I'll send you an email and, I'd love to keep in touch and see what happens the next place you go.
absolutely. Thank you so much. And just to add one real quick thing, and this is developments from just this week. I hope we can talk again because um, just this week I had a really nice afternoon with my ex-wife, and the book I'm working on now, the follow-up to Wounded Angels, I've been writing for about 18 months, and it's called Inner Child Unleashed. You can actually see a preview of it in the back of the Wounded Angels paperback if you buy that. But anyway, long story short is I was just writing it and I wasn't really thinking about publishing it or anything, but it finished itself this week because it started with my divorce, and now 18 months later I had a healing moment, and this is thanks to recovery too, and thanks to these tools. A real healing moment with my ex-wife and my daughter. We sat down and had a nice afternoon together. So maybe we'll be talking again soon because I have another book coming soon.
Yeah, sure. I think that's awesome. Write, as much as you can. I love that. I think creative stuff is part of the process for recovery and healing and, totally. And I also think just even sort of being friends with your ex or being able to sit down and have I mean, that's clearly a sign of sort of healthy people and being able to sort of heal and grow from that. So that I feel like that's just kind of obviously a sign that you're probably a nice guy and probably able to have difficult conversations with, people from your past. So I always love hearing stuff like that. So anyway, thanks, David. And yeah, I'll follow up. Maybe we'll talk about the next book.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. It was
But
great
for
being here.
now, have a nice day in Japan and talk to you soon.
Yep. Thanks.